Thank you very much, John, and I want to say thank you to Randy Pagnotta because the two of you really brought me here to Ivy Hall, and I'm really thrilled to be here. So as John mentioned, I am a special advisor to the ambassador at the UN, a delegate for the Order of Malta to the UN. I've been doing that for about 8 years now, and I started in this realm of anti-human trafficking about 10 years ago. After I finished a master's in theology in Boston, we were moving to New York, and my professor said, well, what are you going to do with this? You know, I'm a nurse by training and I have an MBA, and I was like, I really have no idea. So he said, I said, I do have a passion for healthcare, and I've learned a few business skills along the way, but I also have to have some purposeful meaning with my faith involved in whatever I do. And he said, well, what do you think about working in the area of anti-human trafficking at the United Nations? I just went, I think that would cover all three. And he said, I think it would. So I started way back when, under the direction of Father Tom Brennan, a Salesian priest who was chief of an NGO called Committee to Stop Trafficking in Persons, the CSTIP, at the UN. He took me under his wing, taught me as much as he could about the UN, which is exhausting in itself. I don't think you ever really understand the UN, but, and even when you do, you might not want. But anyway, then a couple of years later, there was an opportunity to become a delegate position became open, and they recommended me from the American Association. And I said, as long as I can continue my work in the anti-human trafficking realm. And they said, oh yes, we'll put you with third committee, which covers anti-human trafficking, and it covers refugee crisis. So that's been my trajectory into this. And I will tell you, it's been amazing. Way back when, we thought we were getting traction with raising awareness, and then all of a sudden we actually had a General Assembly that had the words, you know, anti-human trafficking in it, and we thought, oh, we've done a really good job raising the awareness. Well, it really was because Ban Ki-moon had a backdoor agreement with Pope Francis that said, you support my climate change thing and I'll support your human trafficking. So it really had nothing to do with us really working hard at it. But we're very grateful that it got on the stage and got the recognition it did. So what happened with Global Strategic Operatives was I got befriended by a man I met through the Holy See observer at the United Nations, and his name is Kevin Highland. Kevin's, if you recognize that name, I'm not surprised. He's the former anti-slavery commissioner under Theresa May, and he really did an amazing, he worked at Scotland Yard, he was in law enforcement. He's now with the Santa Marta, he is CEO of the Santa Marta Group, which is the arm from, that formed the anti-human trafficking from the Vatican. So he's done a great job, and he befriended me, and boy, I learned so much from him. And so he said, he kept saying, Debs, you need to focus on policy, focus on policy. I was like, well, what do you want me? And so we worked towards a big leadership meeting, November 18th, 2018. And we brought in member states, global leaders, various people into the UN, and we told them, this is the scourge of it. We all knew it. We all knew what was happening. And, but we said, we really want you to roll up your sleeves. And we had a full day. And my ambassador at the time said, nobody has a full day at the United Nations. Well, after we gave them the first half to say all their speeches, then we gave them lunch and had them come back. And about 75% of people came back. And they really rolled up their sleeves, and we had to try and focus. What were we going to do? We did focus on healthcare. There was two between that and law enforcement. You'll understand why when I start giving the presentation, okay? But, so why don't we just get started here? So what I'm going to say is, first off, we are survivor-led training, okay? We don't do anything without having a survivor tell their story. I believe they set the stage, and it's the human dimension of where we launch from. So we will have.
I think the biggest misconception about what I'm going through specifically is that people don't believe sex trafficking happens here in the States. I was just a regular girl grew up in a home that was dysfunctional. I don't know who grows up in like a perfectly safe home or a bubble, so I didn't have like a lot of siblings or people to look out for me, and no one to really lead and guide me through life. I went to vocational high school as a teen, and I got my cosmetology license, so I started cutting hair. I worked at a hair salon. I was in community college for journalism. I had plans, I had goals, but I think that early childhood, missing that care and nurture, left a hole in my heart, and I think I was searching for love and acceptance. I started drinking, drugging, probably 12, 13, and didn't think it was bad. It was acceptable. I liked it. My parents really didn't tell me not to. At 19, being in a nightclub underage, drinking was fine, and I meet a guy who knew some friends, so he wasn't a complete stranger, and he offers to buy me a drink, and he brings me to the bar, and he spends $7 on me, and I'm impressed. And when we got together, he was maybe 20, 21, not that much older, but dressed nicely, drove a Mercedes, seemed to have it together, seemed to have money, and I was interested. And over this period of, say, 3 to 6 months of dating, that's when the grooming process started. And I had no idea that he was going to become my future pimp. He would bring me out, bring me shopping, take me to the mall, take me out to dinner, just for me to fall in love with him and trust him. And that was the whole purpose. And before I knew it, he would start making me think that my ideas and dreams and goals weren't good enough. Why would you want to work in a hair salon? You can own one. Why would you want to go to school for journalism? That's stupid. I know a way we can make a lot of money. And you can have a family and a business and cars and whatever you want, if you just go and work at this massage parlor. Hearing the idea of like working at a massage parlor didn't thrill me, because why would I ever want to sign up for that? I didn't dream of becoming a prostitute as a little girl. Again, I don't believe anyone in the commercial sex trade dreams of becoming that. Clothes and shoes and jewelry and pocketbooks, and again, at this time, for me being 19, the epitome of success was like having a Louis Vuitton bag, right? Having like this designer expensive bag, and I started to feel like maybe I was missing out. Maybe all this stuff that my boyfriend was telling me could come true. And so this was what it was. I was in this massage parlor from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m., a couple days in a row. My trafficker dropped me off left. My friend had taught me how to speak to the customers. My trafficker comes back, picks me up. We come back home to Boston, and we get out of the car, and I have this pocket full of money. He puts out his hand. And I knew that gesture meant to hand over the money, but I was thinking logically in my mind, like, well, why would I give you all the money? And he says, "There can be a problem?" And I'm like, "No." And I handed the money. And I feel like at that moment, I lost my voice, I lost my courage. I felt ashamed. I wanted him to love me. I was confused, like totally confused. I thought, you love me, you're my boyfriend, like just so confused. And couldn't stand it, really wrestling with this life, like I don't want to live this way, I don't want to be this person, And that's when I started to speak up and say I don't want to do it anymore, and that's when he started to use violence. And there was always a gun on him or present, so I was always in fear that he was going to use it, of course. If he points a gun at your head, you think they're going to use it. Then he would tell me things like he'll kill my family, or he'll tell my family what I'm doing, and I didn't want that to happen. I was in mental and emotional bondage, and that's where it all lies. It's in the mind. I get pregnant by my trafficker, and I figured this was like it. I could retire. It'd been 5 years. I'm going to have a baby. How can you make me prostitute still? Who would buy me while I'm pregnant? And I was so looking forward to this child saving my life, and sadly, he forced me to terminate the pregnancy. And so that became the point where I was like, I gotta leave for good. So I started saving money without him noticing, and I put it in Ziploc bags, tie elastics around it, and put it in the dirt in my potted plants. And I saved probably like $3-4 grand, and I wanted to get my own apartment. Okay, I'm traumatized. I'm suicidal. I'm hopeless. I'm like a fish out of water. I have this big apartment, great. It's empty. I have nothing, and I have no idea how to put my life together. And I want to die. I can't figure it out. I have this giant rent and car payment and car insurance, like all these real life things that I have no idea how to do in real life. And I started hanging out with new friends, but they were old friends, too, and they're all doing Oxycontin, because at that time that was really popular, and cocaine, and they're all drinking, and they start coming over. And I start getting high, and well, there goes the end of that, because you can't get high and live a normal, productive life. And OxyContin at the time was like super expensive. So this leads me right back into the life of prostitution, which led to heroin, homelessness, sleeping on park benches, until finally I got sober in 2007. If you really allow that healing to take place, amazing things can happen. And I started learning about being vulnerable and transparent, with people. And every time I did that in the right places, other women would start telling me their story. And tears would stream down their face. And that's when the real healing started happening. So all of a sudden, I didn't look through the lens as a victim anymore. And I was a survivor, and everything changed. Just amazing doors started opening. And then I developed Bags of Hope as an outreach ministry because I wanted to help women that are still out there realize they don't have to walk in shame anymore like I did. And I started making these bags with toiletries, like real simple. Socks, shampoo, conditioner, soap. A little note from me that says I've been there, if I can do it, you can do it. Some local and national resources for substance abuse, trafficking, mental health, the rape crisis center, any way I could reach out to these women, I would. Or if I just hand them this book, and they read it, and they say, oh my gosh, that's my life too. And I'm like, exactly. You can change your life. It can get better. There's hope. And I think that's the biggest thing, is the hope. Because if we're still alive and breathing, and there's an opportunity to get well. There's an opportunity for recovery.
This is, I just want to say that Jasmine Grace is one of my dearest friends and colleagues because I've been with her for over 10 years. She and I and Homeland Security made a wonderful tri-team, and we'd go out and speak to college kids. We'd go out and talk to the airports, the airlines, the businesses, sports people. And I will, hands down, when she spoke, it was everybody. You could hear the pin drop. And we're going to unpack a lot of what she said, but she talks about the grooming process. And that grooming process is still alive and well, and even more so today. And she is probably one of the most healed, articulate, wonderful ladies that I know, and we still work well together. And so we'll talk more about Jasmine, but she is an amazing lady. You can't do it alone. You have to have partners. So not only the Order of Malta and the United Nations, but we partner also with Northwell Health. We have members of the Sovereign Council on their board, and it all works well together. The Foundation United, they bring all the partnerships together. A woman named Elizabeth Good, who's just doing a lot of good with all the people that she has. I'll talk about them later because now we're going to be getting into an educational curriculum for K through 12. Hold that thought. Life Perspectives, a wonderful agency made up of Catholic women, but they don't have Catholic in their name, but they're all about grief and the loss of, when you talk about the loss of life, so many of these girls have forced abortions. The worst one that I encountered was somebody that was in the life for 10 years and had 17 forced abortions. So you think about that and the trauma and the pain. So when we get asked, oh, you don't do, bring them to abortions? No, even independent of my Catholic faith and Catholic teaching, I will not add one speck of more trauma to these women. So there's ways of discussing it in different venues. So let's just go over some of the basics of an overview, okay? So what is human trafficking? Well, besides a public health crisis, it is very lucrative, $150 billion according to the ILO, the International Labor Organization, illicit profits. 50 million, it used to be 40 million. You'll hear from the State Department 27, 28 million, but they don't include forced marriages. We feel forced marriages should be included, so that's where you get the 50 million. And 50 million just got changed last September. So it's from 40 to 50. What adds to that, without being political, but it's the border crisis, the Afghanistan debacle, the Ukraine war, everything's pushed it right up. Not to mention, we'll mention it later, but the COVID epidemic. 72% sexually exploited. That is the majority. The women and girls are the majority, but it goes also the inverse when you talk about labor trafficking. It goes more 60-40. So, and 3 in 1,000 person trapped in these jobs. Okay, it's a lot of words. You don't have to worry about what's the definition, but the important thing is that the UN actually came up with an international definition, which is miraculous in itself to get an agreement. It was back in 2000, and it's the Palermo Protocol. The most important, the words here are force, fraud, and coercion. That is the recipe for human trafficking. It might be exploitation if somebody is getting paid less than minimum wage, but once you add force, fraud, and coercion, now you're into the human trafficking realm. Okay, the victims, anyone under 18 is always a victim, okay? Any adult performing, commercial sex with force, fraud, and coercion, anyone any age, force, fraud, and coercion performing labor or organ harvesting trafficking. Okay, so the 3 forms: sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and organ harvesting. All right? Okay, how does it happen? Well, it all starts with a lie. I mean, you go online, you see the forced marriages, you see the promise of work or debt bondage, social media promising you a friendship or a relationship, the grooming. You heard Jasmine talking about being at a club. She met the guy through friends, and yet he groomed her for 6 months. And so when we were at universities, and all the girls would say, but Jasmine, you weren't handcuffed, you weren't tied to anything. Why didn't you run? And she tried to a few times, and she talks about her beatings in different, different talks. But all the time, the main reason was that he took her home. She took him home to family dinners on Thanksgiving, Christmas. He was her boyfriend. And then he met the family, saw the vulnerabilities, saw the mental illness of the father, saw the drug addiction with the brother. He knew he had her. And so, he would say, wouldn't it be sad if your family home burnt down in the middle of the night and with your family in it? She says, don't do anything to my family. I'll do whatever you want. So that's how. And all the girls in the colleges would be just dropping their jaws, knowing how awful it must have been. So where does it happen? Okay, wherever there's poverty, lack of opportunity, corruption, civil unrest, war zones, populations can't count on the protection of the government. I think of Haiti. I've gone to Haiti for over 20 years. I mean, it's a mess down there. Human trafficking is rampant down there, as well as organ trafficking. So these are places. I love this map because this is a map that, thanks to Johns Hopkins International Studies, they did a flow of trafficking. So there's always countries of origin, destination, and transit, where they originate, where you're going to, where you're going through. So you can see many of them coming to the United States, going from the United States, in the United States, going over, of course, Amsterdam, Russia, all the typical players, and the Asia Pacific, of course, with the shrimp boats. What about nationally? Where is it? Top 3 states. Well, we put New York and Florida as tied, so we count them as 1. And then California and Texas, no surprise, border states. And then we have the corridors. And people are like, what are corridors? Well, I was even surprised. Milwaukee to Chicago is one of the worst corridors in the United States. Why? It's a perfect storm of motels, drugs, weapons, and truckers. Not the truckers against trafficking, but really the ones that are supplying the women and boys and girls. And yes, boys are the preferred commodity right now, which is so sad. We'll get into that more. Okay, people always say, well, how many in the United States? You can't find that. It's only as good as the reporting. And so what we do, and this, really from the TIP report, the Trafficking in Persons report from the US state, we make an assumption. We say, well, if there's 50 million, maybe 10%, that seems reasonable. So it's 5 million people estimated in the United States. Okay, who are the victims? Well, it can be anybody. Look at the first picture if you can see it, the young girl that's rolling her eyes at her parents. Don't we? That's kind of a common thing. Always tell kids the worst thing you can do to put on Facebook is that my parents don't understand me, they're driving me crazy. Boom, they're going to be friended by a lot of different people. The bully in the school, or I should say the boy or girl that is bullied is the one that's vulnerable. Then what about the immigrant just trying to find some work? And then, of course, those that are voluntarily giving up their organs. Oh, for $150,000, you can live on one another kidney. Send it to it. And then they get wrapped up in it. They never get what's promised to them. And I also just read on the train here an incredible article about organ harvesting. And Representative Chris Smith, who's a very good friend of ours, a great Catholic, I don't know how he's made it I don't know how he's lasted 31, 32 years as a representative in Congress, but he has passed, got a bill passed going against the CCP and the Fulon Gang. I always say that wrong. Thank you very much. They have had the awful, horrific situation of having organs taken from them and given to the older leaders of the CCP. So this has now been out in the open, trying to really crack down on it, and this is happening with children as well, very much so in India and China especially. And then, of course, the woman that just feels that she has no other choice but to sell her body to possibly, feed her children or whatever. So these are the vulnerabilities. There's other vulnerabilities, of course, but I'll just highlight some of the runaways and homeless. Within 48 hours of a runaway, if somebody is a foster child and runs away, it only takes 48 hours for them to get picked up by a trafficker, okay? Financial stressors, for sure. And then that goes along with the global pandemic of COVID-19, big surge and rise after the COVID-19. Closed schools, closed everything. Parents are losing their jobs. They're being stressed out. They could be right across in their own living room and their kids are on phones and somebody's befriending them. And they're lonely. They want friends. And they say, just meet us at the corner. Well, skyrocketing rates of sex trafficking during and after COVID-19. Why is training so important? Well, we need to identify. People are not coming up saying, I'm being trafficked. They sure aren't. And some don't even know what that word means. Depending on what age they went into it, they may not even know what another lifestyle. They don't know what to identify love as, because this is who's been caring for them, and taking care of them, feeding them, and showing them, quote unquote, love. So they are not going to self-identify. So what we did, I told you about Kevin Highland and our UN meeting back in November 2018. And we looked, and what we did, even though I was biased, because I'm a nurse, and I, of course, wanted to go into the healthcare systems, we made it evidence-based decision. And what it is 88 to 92% of survivors have sought out medical care while being trafficked. And 68% use the emergency room. So we'd go in, so we decided we had to, whenever anybody starts something, you have to have evidence and based and studies and make sure you're credible. So why do they seek medical services? It could be any reason. They've been beaten. They have a broken arm. They have a botched abortion. They have some type of injury, or they're pregnant and they need prenatal care. Okay, many, many different reasons. But the barriers are significant. They fear deportation, arrest, retaliation by their trafficker is probably one of the biggest things. They're often there with them, speaking for them. And so on average, it takes them 7 visits to an emergency room before they're ready for help. So I say to the nurses and doctors and social workers and everybody else being trained, don't expect immediate gratification. They're not going to be, you're not going to, maybe you're on the day that it's the 7th visit and it's going to be wonderful, but don't expect it, okay? What kind of things are we looking for? Red flags. This is just one list. I have several, but they're accompanied by someone who insists on answering their questions for them because they don't speak English. We need to teach the healthcare providers how to get them away from their trafficker. They have history of sexual and substance abuse, incomplete abortions, miscarriages, multiple reproductive losses. That's why we team up with Life Perspectives. They're not in control. Do you get to keep the money they make? Where do you sleep? I have been asked, how do you differentiate someone that's being domestic violence versus trafficking? Because they're very similar, except there are differences. One question is simple. What's your address? Most sex traffic victims have no idea of their address. They let them keep their phones because they, disengage their GPSs. They'll look out the window and they'll see a tree. I see a branch. I see, flowers, no signs, and they can't call for help. So this is really an interesting phenomenon, and they will not know. They're moved around from state to state over the lines. So a lot of inappropriate dress for the weather, branding. The tattoos, they have lots of, you noticed the tattoos on Jasmine? Well, oftentimes the trafficker will put a significant tattoo. May not be their name, it might be something of a gang, whatever they have, they will have something significant, could be in the genitalia area, sometimes it's under the lip, and so we have to teach the healthcare providers where to look. And that's that, and they have to get them away from their trafficker and say, we have to do an exam, a physical exam, and how key their physical assessment skills are at that point. And they want to leave AMA. And this is where we have to bring in security. You do not chase them out the door. You don't, the trafficker will protect his commodity and property at all costs. They're probably armed, and they won't hesitate to shoot someone. So there's a lot of things that go in with our healthcare trainings. And this is a quote from Jasmine. Just, no one asked her, are you okay? Are you doing all right? They're so overworked and understaffed that they're here looking at their computer and not looking at people in the eye. So we teach them, you have to look at them, you have to read the body language, you have to do things. So anyway, and you have to ask them the right questions. So that's where trauma-informed care comes in, and we have a whole, we don't have time today to go into that, but we have HT 101 and 102, and we go into trauma-informed care. We go into vicarious trauma to the healthcare providers too. So anyway, we also have this global effort was a research pilot study, and it took us over 3 years to finish it because of COVID, but we had to look at it, and we had to target CEOs. Why? Because if we didn't get the buy-in from the top, it just didn't get done. And I learned that early on. I would do grand rounds. Oftentimes I was doing grand rounds. And I'd go in, do 250 people, grand rounds. I'd call them 3 months later. And the goal was not only to increase their awareness, but as an action item to set up an internal human trafficking task force so that they would have makeup of physicians and nurses and social workers and the like, and administrators. I call them in 3 months. How's it going? Deb, we loved the information was great presentation, but priorities took us away from it and we had to do something else. As soon as you get buy-in from a CEO and it's part of their mission and their strategy, and this is a priority, then I could say, so-and-so really wants to get this done. And that changed the whole thing. So that is why this research pilot was so important. We had 5 sites in the United States, and I'm sorry if you can't see that, and 5 international sites. And we went with integrated delivery network systems, and what that means are those are the big healthcare systems with about 20 to 40 healthcare hospitals as part of them. And the big ones like Northwell was 70,000 people, Advocate Aurora in Chicago, 75,000. And so, and we tried to equate those into the international realm. We started with India, blew our numbers out of the water, Chennai, India. And that's where we learned an awful lot about what's going on with children over there. So, and let me just keep going. And here's one of our great CEOs, Bob Garrett. Just saw him the other night. He's so happy to be really involved in this effort. And we did at Hackensack Meridian the first community clinical leadership meeting. And what that was, we didn't plan on doing that. But what we did was we were helping them develop their policy and protocol. And so we brought together to meet the clinicians, the local FBI, the local Homeland Security, the local social network systems of shelters and NGOs, so they could meet each other. And it turned out to be so effective, because at one point, there was a clinician that said, a nurse said, okay, if I'm confused, I'm sure other people are, wait a minute, Homeland Security, you told us to contact you first, but the local DA's office, you told us to contact you first. Which is it? So we had a great discussion, and then what happened was they explained, Homeland Security explained what T visas are all about when you are, an immigrant, and then they could understand, oh, that's when we call you. They wrote it right into their protocol, and it was like a living document. It was beautiful. We put that in every single one of our trainings, and it turned out to be very effective. What did we measure? Qualitatively, it was confidence, and the purposes were identification and taking appropriate action. So we needed to know pre and post training. Did it work? Were you more confident? Number of victims, quantitatively. How many were actually identified pre and post and creation of the new policy? Well, statistically significant, absolutely everything was increased, and even 3 to 5 times higher increase in identified numbers, all right? I won't go into all that, but we also we took all the policies, all 10 sites, synthesized them, normalized them for cultural differences, and then looked at the common denominators. We came up with a universal human trafficking for healthcare providers policy and protocol. This we presented at the United Nations, September 23rd, last year, 2022. We gave it to the World Health Organization. Something like it does not exist. We have Ebola policies, we have COVID policies, we have domestic violence policies, nothing for human trafficking. So this sits on Dr. Tedros' desk, waiting for approval to be implemented worldwide. We already have several countries, Canada, Philippines, Ireland, and the UK, all want to, with national health, want to send it right through their whole system, which is great. So we feel like this was our big contribution to, and then we even had a signatory letter with the ones that are outlined as CEOs, but a lot of political clout there. We've trained over 500,000 persons to date, and that's still growing. Next steps, well, the 4 Ps are prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. I already said no one can do it alone. And so in prosecution, the law enforcement, we work very closely hand in hand with them. Protection is what we're trying to do with safe homes, get to that in a second, and prevention. That we're now going to team up with an entity that wrote a K through 12 curriculum, and Father Czech is also going to mention it too, because he's in a juvenile home, and we're doing adults, but K through 12 and plus parents, it's really badly needed. Survivors, I'll tell you, oftentimes they're put in a home for homeless shelter. The traffickers will find them within 12 hours, and they'll be out back doing in the life. And housing, if you ask Homeland Security, what can we do to help you? They'll say, you know what we need? Beds, beds, and more beds. The more we learned, the more we identified, or taught people to identify, the more the numbers rose. So we need more beds. If you don't have a bed to send when they're ready and they're willing to go, and if you don't have a bed, you've lost them. You've absolutely lost them. So let me share with you the O'Connell House. I do have a little brochure up here, hot off the press, about the O'Connell House. That is Father Terry O'Connell, which you probably can't see over to the left and in front of the door. And he was my spiritual director for 15 years. And he said, Deb, I want to show you something. And of course, he knew the work I was doing. And so he shows this to me, and I'm like, wow, the rooms are enormous, and they're all private bathrooms. And it's industrial-sized kitchen, industrial-sized laundry. What? He says, you like it, don't you? I say, I sure do. But I was telling him how, when the girls are picked up, either by a sting, by law enforcement, and they're pregnant, there might be one or two now. I can't say there's none, but and that only happened in the last year or two. But for the longest time, there was no place that a pregnant, trafficked woman could go. They wouldn't be allowed because they were pregnant. What does that mean? Go get an abortion and come back and we have a bed for you. All the more reason why the Catholic Church needs to be involved in this. All the more reason why Order of Malta needs to be involved in this, okay? We will accept and love them both. So we're trying to repurpose church properties. And this can be, it doesn't have to be Catholic. We can do ecumenical, but former convents, sadly, are in use, former rectories, schools, and we could put them to good use. So we are actually going to be asking our dear Pope Francis to thank him, first of all, for his support. I mean, he has been very much a stalwart out there on proposing our good work in the anti-human trafficking world. But also, you know, when you look at the diocese, there's almost 300 in the United States. There's about 3,000 worldwide. What if he just designated one, just one, not being greedy, not asking for 5 or 10, just one home designated for human trafficking? And that's the challenge I'm even putting to Malta. Just one. And so I think then we can make a dent into healing those souls. What it makes up of, we have office space, we have workshop space, we have security. We have, like I said, you know, very large rooms and private bathrooms and industrial-sized kitchen. We train religious sisters, Orthodox religious sisters. Why do I put that Orthodox in there? Well, because there's good and bad in every single organization. I don't care what you are. You know, you could be a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, anyone. But we need the good religious sisters that are not going to drive them to abortion clinics. And does that happen? Occasionally. So we make sure that right now we had a beautiful group of 25 sisters. Father Chuck, you should be in that picture. And Father Chuck was involved. This was in Louisiana. I'm not going to steal his thunder and tell you about it. A beautiful area on the Louisiana State Police Barracks. And we trained 25 religious sisters from Nigeria who have now, we have 4 of them at the O'Connell House, okay? Depending on the number of beds. And they are the caregivers. They're not there to run the house per se, but they're there to be the loving, nurturing presence that these girls so desperately need. And everything happens late at night, and Father Chuck, you'll probably get to that. Some of them have to rock them back to sleep. So we are blessed to have. We're not there to change, you know, just like a Catholic hospital. We'll accept anybody. They don't have to be Catholic, but we sure will. We're not going to hide our Catholicity, that's for sure. Okay. Here they are arriving in Massachusetts, and what Father Clancy is holding up there is they're all welcomed by the local bishop. The local archbishop accepts them and registers them, and that's what's going on there. And there's the chapel. We have a place for Mass and prayer, and beautiful chapel at the O'Connell House. And we're Okay, just a few international things, because you're probably wondering, okay, that's good, that's local, but international and national efforts. What happened with, okay, new Malta Human Trafficking Program. Okay, nationally, we have a new Tri-Association Anti-Human Trafficking Committee. We have, I've been asked and charged to chair this new committee, and we've gotten 4 people from each association. So we have a dozen right now. Randy, you're part of it, and thank you for all the work you're doing. But we're actually asking everyone to get involved, and we will have now we have a new subcommittee for that new education, the K through 12. There's an On Watch, and it's called On Watch. We're using it as a volunteer online modular training program, and it's going to be in each of the associations. It's only on the American Association website right now, but it's only an hour to an hour and a half, and it gives somebody a background. So so many good-hearted people, I want to volunteer. Well, know what you're getting into. This is not easy work, and you're going to hear more from Father Chuck. It's hard. And you will be attacked if you think about spiritual warfare. The evil one does not want this to happen. He loves people in bondage, okay? So they have to know what they're getting into. And it spits out a little certificate, and so it's kind of a way for us to know that our volunteers, our Malta family members, our confreres are at least trained. Safe houses, repurposing those Catholic properties. I didn't know how many properties there really are, and I still don't. But all I know is when a friend of mine came from the Archdiocese of Boston and said, we were at dinner and said, I saw the list. Do you know how many properties there are empty and available? I have no idea, 25, 50, I don't know. Over 1,500. Now, they're not all applicable for a safe home, but there sure must be 1 or 2. So that's why we're going after our relationships with the clergy, the priests, the bishops, and cardinals. We should be able to find some. And I think it's a great opportunity for the Catholic Church. We have a good black eye and some somewhat well-deserved, but we can help that. We can put a gold star in place of that black eye. What a great opportunity. And for our young people to see what we're going to do to help these traffic victims. Okay, I already talked about training and Catholic healthcare. There's lots of Catholic healthcare. Joseph Meany, you're helping out that Catholic Healthcare Alliance. You're helping establish it. And so we're trying to build up our Catholic healthcare that is pro-life and respects the dignity of every age group. So this is something we're really trying to do. Our international, okay, this is something called a push communication. And what is a push communication? I really didn't understand it until one Friday night, got a call from our friends at Jones Day. Deb, we need to do a push communication for all these people that are getting trapped in trafficking over at the Ukraine border. Okay, well, the traffickers are the one group that beats the humanitarians to any natural disaster. And it was absolutely true on the Ukraine border. But anybody that had been from the former Soviet Union did not want to get on those buses, those government-issued buses. They didn't trust where they'd end up. So here's all these good Samaritans lining up in the cars. They get in, they're never to be seen again. So what happened? Great people on the border, great country people, great efforts. Poland, Romania and Maltese are international. They're all putting posters. They're all getting brochures. But you know what? As good as a brochure can be, can you imagine the woman that's exhausted? She's not only exhausted, she's hungry, she's tired, she's stressed and traumatized, left her husband, left her father, left her brother, all the men in her family, have children, and oh, by the way, you got to worry about what is this about? A push communication, as I was taught, think of going into the airspace and you're going on vacation with a friend or spouse and you're going into Antigua. Ding, your phone dings. Welcome to Antigua. Don't forget to do this, this, or this. How remarkable, how smart. We all know that movie, You've Got Mail. We know how addictive our phones are. And around the world, it doesn't matter how poor people are, they all have a cell phone. It's amazing. So they may not read a brochure, they may not sit through and stay awake through a live training, but they're going to answer that ding. So we first of all, we made up an informational, we didn't use the word trafficker. Watch out for kidnappers, because that's what was happening. The kids were going up to get a blanket or food for their mom and sister, and they were gone. So watch out for kidnappers. If you have to get in that car, get the picture. Get the picture of the driver, the picture of the passport, get the picture of the license plate. Get anything you can and send it to the person that's not in the car with you. And what about the address where you're going? We put this on an informational card. And then we translated it into 6 we translated it with our translator with Google Translation, but then we got the UN people that spoke the language to edit it. And they just made minor edits. So now we're onto something here. So we're making all our training into those, in addition to English, Spanish, and Italian, it's all going to be in these languages as well. But this gets pushed as soon as they cross a border into the, so we partnered with the cell phone CEOs of Eastern Europe. And that's how it got into the cell phones. So this is pretty cute, pretty cool, using the technology for some good, right? I think Malta has a lot to be proud of on that one. Finally, if you suspect anything, everyone should have this number in their cell phone. 888-888 is the other bookends, and 3737 in the middle. 888-888-3737 in the middle. That's who you can call. Don't ever try to apprehend somebody on your own. It's too dangerous. Call the number. In fact, better than that's in Washington, you should call 911 first, your local 911, okay? And how to get involved? I mean, that's just taking a stand, educating. And of course, the national, tell everybody the hotline. And then, advocacy and support. And just get involved. And I'm hoping that Malta will be, our Tri-Association will get everyone around the country. We already have a house in the American Association. The Western Association has one in Oakland, and they're working on one that will be done in November in Colorado Springs. And waiting for federal. And I know you have some choices here. The Carmel Monastery, but you have some other ones that I know that, Mary, you have Dawn's Place, I think. And then there's other ones that you've got to look and see what's available and really work with the people. And if you need help, give us a call. We can try and link you up to the, right now, I just gave a tour to local FBI and local Homeland Security up in Massachusetts. They can't wait for this to get open because there's a waiting list. So whatever we can do to help you, really, we're here. And that's what we're going to try and emulate all throughout Malta.